Dave McHugh, you're very welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. It's nice to be here. Last time we did this on Zoom and it was COVID, right?
Yes, it was. And what's interesting is the last time we did this was during an Olympic year. And obviously this year, again, we have some incredible athletes heading to Paris to compete.
Yeah. For us, it's an important year, of course. But our Olympic athletes and Paralympic athletes, we'll talk about them too. Yeah. But, our current crop of Olympic athletes are all gold medalists, and that brings different pressures in itself. Expectations, public expectations and personal expectations. So it's a slightly different cycle. It's a different feel to it, Paul and Fintan, Kellie, they all already have Olympic gold medals, World Championships, European Championships. It's about now continued success, and nothing stays still in high performance sports. So like the bar rises all the time, and that brings different pressures the second time around, I think, for sure.
Yeah. In terms of context, would you mind giving our listeners just a brief? We're obviously talking about Olympics. Obviously, you have a background in. Obviously, you're a professional sailing background. You've obviously gone through those Olympic cycles yourself in terms of training. But what you do now day to day, and I suppose why we're talking about Olympic athletes.
Yeah. Well, like my journey was probably slightly different to most. My one love throughout my now 50 years on this planet has always been sport. So I was involved in it from a young age through hockey, through my dad. And then through school, multi-sports, but rugby and hockey primarily. And then sailing became a thing in my early teens. I learned to sail, and was very fortunate to connect with a guy that I went to school with who's a little bit younger than me. And we then took sailing seriously, but I never really stopped playing either of the other two. I'm regrettably looking back at, say, the 96 and 2000 Olympic cycles. If I had given up everything else and worked harder, would I be an Olympian? Maybe. But no regrets. So I kind of then morphed into sports marketing and sponsorship through Premier Marketing, looking after Canterbury. And at the time, they sponsored Ireland and the 4 provinces, and also Helly Hansen, who sponsored me at the time. And then that led me into Leinster. And I went in as operations manager in 2002, progressed through there to team manager under 4 different coaches. And around 2006-07 sort of time, I kind of just said, what am I going to do when I grow up here? This is great, and it's a dream job, and it still is. And I look back very fondly on it and go, I really do miss being part of a high performance team. But I needed to move on, and I needed to develop personally as well. So I had an excellent mentor in Paul McNaughton, and he said, well, what do you enjoy and what are you good at? And I said, well, I enjoy working with the players, and I'm good at working on the sponsorship side. And he said, well, there's your answer. So I took the kind of leap of faith and registered a business in 2006 and left Leinster, I think, halfway through that season, and said, okay, I'm going to be an agent. Very quickly realized that being an agent isn't really what I wanted to do. And I would always tell people, we're not an agency, we're a sports marketing business, and we manage people. So again, the core takeaway through my career has been managing people and managing sponsorship. And basically then built lineup from scratch in 2006 to now, 2024, it's 18 years old. We've grown every year bar one little blip during COVID, which is very explainable. We've seen agencies and agents come and go. It's not a hugely populated landscape in this country. It's obviously a small country. Globally, there's agencies in global football, NFL, women's sports. So, we've managed to carve a niche by being a specialist in the management and sponsorship space, as opposed to the on-field contract negotiation space, which is something I moved away from about 6 years ago, and partnered with eSportif, who are now Wasserman. They look after all our on-field contract negotiations, and we have a fee share. And then we look after the management of our players and their players from a day-to-day basis. And that ranges from commercial deals down to boots and cars and concierge and, and then applying a lot of what I've learned as a person, as an athlete, as a business person in terms of mentoring and dual career and support through transition as well. So it's, as I say, it's not a very populated landscape. There is probably one other agency that's big, Navy Blue, and then there's a number of smaller agencies like Alvin Sports Management and, a couple of emerging people every couple of years decide it's good. And, competition is good, and the modus operandi is always just be better than everybody else and continue to get better. And the day that somebody comes along and does it better, as I said to you 4 years ago, I'll hold my hat up, take my hat off to them and say, well done. You've stuck to task and you've built something that's good. So that's my mindset, at 50, having done this for the guts of 18 years, what happens next? I don't know. I've certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think that previous episode that we did, your mindset really came across in that. I actually took so much from that episode myself. And obviously for anyone who's new to the podcast or only listening recently, what we're looking to do with this latest series is really look under the hood for a business owner, a founder. What's it like day to day? And one thing you mentioned there to me was that job that you had with Leinster was like the dream job, right? It was really nice setup for you, but yet you had a passion to want to explore your own business. And I'm curious, there's probably two questions here for you. First one is, what for you helped you make that jump from actually this is quite nice and steady and I could do this for a long time to actually, no, you know what, I want to now take this leap, start my own business. And then maybe the second part of that, if you don't mind, is obviously the financial crash happened very soon after that. I'm sure there was challenges, as there is in any new business. How were you able to persevere at that time, being so early in your founder's journey?
Yeah, well, let's address the first one. As I said, it was the dream job working in Leinster. Now, we weren't a winning team in those days. I mean, we won on occasions. We had some great days, but we weren't what you would call a high-performing organisation in every aspect. And secondly, somebody said to me once, you never played rugby for Ireland, so you're not likely to progress and become team manager of the national team. And I sort of thought, that's a very good point. So, what am I good at? And, it was a brave decision, but it was also kind of craving change. And you do the same thing over and over again. It does get a little monotonous. And it's certainly in team high performance sport, you're always on. There is no off switch. And Ronan O'Donnell, who took over my role, Guy used to be at the time, they're there, still there. And it is the dream. And to be part of successful days with a group of people where you've, set a goal and achieved it, that's an irreplaceable feeling, whether you're on or off field. So it was a bit of a leap of faith. I managed, again, Paul McNaughton, God rest him, helped me exit with a small exit payment, which kept me going for the first 6 months into 2007. And then it just became about, okay, well, how do I leverage my relationship? How do I build my profile? How do I connect with people? And how do I do it differently than at the time 30 odd other rugby agents that were operating in the market? Well, what was the point of difference? And that came back to my experience as a sailor, as a team member and working with elite athletes, is that I really felt that players needed more than just a contract negotiated every 1, 2 or 3 years. And it didn't give me any particular joy going in and fighting over 10 or 20K in one direction or another. So I was like, okay, well, if you want to be the best you can be, do what you enjoy. And it sounds a bit wishy-washy, but if you do something you love and you're good at it, the reward comes.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes about building relationships and maintaining relationships and generating relationships that give you income and recurring income. But I would say that it all also comes back to having the right talent. So I was very fortunate when I started that, a number of the senior players sort of said, look, really like this model. It's different. My co-founder at the time, Will Green, who played for Leinster in England, he sort of said, yeah, look, the game is changing and rugby agents aren't just about negotiating contracts. So, and my youngest player, who's still one of my closest friends and my daughter's godfather, Rob Kearney, was one of the youngest to come with me. And I still work with Rob and we're still great friends. And I get a lot of joy out of that. Yeah. I'd never call it work. I mean, we have our ups and downs. Occasionally we disagree about things and, the mindset from Rob hasn't changed transitioning from an athlete to the business world. Is he's still motivated and driven and hungry and wants results. So, financial crash came, get the second part. It wasn't really a crash because I didn't have anything. I had a mortgage and, I was working from home at the time and, I can't remember it having a huge impact on me personally. And I was earning enough to take out enough to cover the mortgage and pay the bills. And, I've always said to everybody in this industry, I never did it to make money. I did it because I love it and the money follows. So, even now, 18 years later, if you do well and your balance sheet is healthy and you're solvent, and if you can be profitable, well, that's great. I'm not motivated by having a bigger house or buying a 242 car in July or having a holiday home somewhere. I mean, sure, they'd be nice to have at some point in life, but they're not motivating factors. The motivation comes from the fact that I'm lucky enough to be connected to and part of high-performing athletes' journeys. And now, over the years, I'm lucky enough to work with brands and agencies to help them create solutions for their clients or create solutions for the brands themselves. And our kind of portfolio of brands that we work closely with, like Vodafone, Aer Lingus, and Bank of Ireland, and Aldi, they really are the mainstay of the business because they're the ones that invest in sport.
Yeah.
So it's been able to advise them on how to, why to, when to, and if to. So that's become a much greater part of the business over its existence. Is, back to what I said, I'm not an agent. I manage people. I create commercial value. So I would see myself much more as a sports advisor and much more of a marketeer than the former. Managing people is part of that, and there's very direct parallels between the higher level profile talent and the brands, and at the end of the day, everything is impacted by performance. So if an individual or a team are performing well, my job is an awful lot easier.
Yeah.
So like, to address the first question, the leap of faith, I had to do something different. And I'd never really had a job before Leinster. So, I never really had a desire at the time to be an employee either. And I don't know whether that's a different mindset. I may very well become an employee at some point. I have no issues with that. Yes. But at the time, I just kind of wanted to be my own boss. And I wanted to try to do something in an industry that was different to what existed previously. And I've enjoyed working for myself. And it has, you talked earlier about, business ownership, owning a business. And, I'm proud to say I own a business. And I'm proud to say I have no debt. And I'm proud to say that I enjoy what I do. But not every day is like great fun and glamorous, and there's a lot of admin, and there are headaches and worries, and you are constantly looking at management accounts and performance and hustling, and that's just part of business. If that ever stalled or I don't have the ability to grow, I think I'd probably be looking at something different.
Because actually, you've touched on something really important there, where like there's no doubt as I'm listening to you speak, and it resonates with me because I have a passion for what I do, but also I know that there's a lot of hard work that goes into that, etc. You mentioned there about this idea of, you mentioned some amazing clients, by the way, right, in terms of brands, but you talked about then hustling as well, right? And I know we hear that idea of, right, you've got to work hard, you've got to hustle. As a business founder, I think there's a misconception sometimes that you do that in the first year or two, you've got your business set up and everything's rosy after that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I have a great team around me too. I mean, it's not just me. As I was explaining before we started, Elma Byrne, my commercial director, who's nearly 3 years in the business, she's on maternity leave. She's added huge value in her time there. We've had a number of employees over the years who come and go. Some add value, some move on, some decide to go and do it alone, and that's great because I think everybody's motivation is different. And I've also a great young guy in the office, Luke, who's in there about 6 months, and he's learning his craft, I suppose. But he's had to really step up in the last couple of weeks since Elma has gone on mat leave. And as I said, this is the test. The test isn't being told what to do. The test is doing. So you've now got a great opportunity for the next 6-ish months to show me what you can do. And, that's how you get a job, because it's very hard in any industry when you're starting out. There's a million jobs out there. But a job is a job. Like purpose is kind of the fuel to enjoyment and passion. So if you're lucky enough to find something that you really like, work really hard at it and see where it takes you. And everybody who comes in at that kind of intern level, the most valuable part is that on their LinkedIn in 6 months or 12 months' time, they will have experience. And even in my own experience, I never hire people off CVs. CVs are a piece of paper. They tell you what you did. I don't care what you did. I want to know what you can do.
Very good.
So, there is trial and error in that. And, as a small team, we're not maybe as attractive to a lot of people because there's a lot of kind of self-discipline and, personal drive and motivation required to work in an office, say 3 days a week and remotely 2 days a week, and also to accept the fact that our industry is not a 9-to-5 industry. A lot of our clients will come online at 4 o'clock onwards and up till 8, 9. So, you have to, again, have the right mindset. And I always look at the phone, if somebody WhatsApps me or rings me at, 7:30, 8 o'clock, it's like, do they add value to my life? Do I like them? Am I willing to take this call? The answer is 95% of the time, yes.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you were looking at your phone going, I don't want to answer this, it's outside of hours, it just doesn't work that way.
No, we talked a little bit about that as well on our last episode, this idea of not so much looking at Monday and being extremely excited, but actually looking at Monday and saying, right, I'm going to enjoy what I'm here to do for the next 5 days.
Yeah, there are very few Mondays where I wake up and go, oh God, I have to get through this week. There are Mondays where I wake up and go, I'm just not feeling it. And I think, as a business owner or an entrepreneur, whatever you want to call me at this stage, of course you have days where you go, I'm just not feeling it. I've no motivation. I'm low. I just need a break, And it is hard in a people management business to get a break. We went away last summer for about 2.5 weeks, the longest we've ever been away for. But as my wife said, you were online most of the time and on phones and joining calls, So again, it's a lifestyle business. So it's a choice. And, I don't mind that. I can put my out of office on, but it doesn't mean that I'm not going to have to reply to something, at 9 a.m. or 4 p.m. front end of the day or join a call occasionally. Yeah. I don't really mind that. So, again, as I said, there are times where you just go, not interested. And, we talk, the underarching principle of the podcast is about, living well. Exercise is a huge part of my well-being and my motivation to get through a week. It gives me that break and disconnect. And, I drive occasionally, I cycle most times. I love 10-minute cycles to meetings. I love getting out, lifting once a week or twice a week, playing paddle or, golf or whatever. It just gives me those little breaks. And I can say to myself, there's nothing that can't wait an hour or 2 hours, or in case of golf, maybe 4 hours. But if I can't answer an email between 3 this afternoon and 6, that's okay. I'll follow up tomorrow evening, or if it's not critical, I'll wait till Monday.
Yes.
So for me, balance is so important. Being home with my kids for dinner, I'm going to say my wife might query this, but I'd say I'm home 90% of the time for dinner at 5:30 with the kids. And that's an important part of my life. It's important to be able to go to PTA meetings. It's important to be able to do the odd school run. I always do a morning school run, but it's important too that if I'm not busy, that I'll ring her and say, look, I'll pick up the kids at 3. Let me do that. I'm not busy. Instead of sitting there trying to be busy and then getting more frustrated.
And I think that's a common thread throughout. Like a lot of the guests we have on this podcast, they talk about how they build those aspects into their working day so they do have that breather. Because I'm sure a lot of people listening in, not only business owners, managers, etc., we can always find something to do. It can always be difficult for us to step away from the laptop or the phone. But then it's what does that give us if we are carving out time?
It's just that recharge. It's that step away, and it is hard. And in the modern world, the phone, as I sit with mine face down here, and I know you don't have one out, but I'm wondering what's coming in. Who's ringing? Have I missed anything? I think that's just symptomatic of society these days. But I would say, two of my hobbies are boxing and mountain biking. Right, both do not require you to have a phone. Both require absolute immersion and full concentration, because you get hurt otherwise.
Yes.
And it's those couple of hours a week where you're kind of totally present. I'll segue a little bit. My wife asked me to go and trial a class for her. She's involved in a health business. And I said, I'm mountain biking that morning. And she goes, class at lunchtime, be fine. It's not physical. I said, what is it? And she goes, transformational breathing. And I sort of was very cynical and laughed and sort of said, I'd rather have a colonoscopy. She said, no, just go and try this teacher out. Tell me what you think. So I went and did this class. And I've been doing it regularly ever since. Fabulous girl called Sinead Tormey. And it's just an immersive 1 hour of mindfulness and breathing and focus. It has huge physical benefits in terms of slowing your nervous system down. But I love it on a Monday evening at 6:30 because it's actually an hour where I'm absolutely present, switched off. And I genuinely walk out of there feeling like I've been on holidays for a week. So some people go, it's a bit, alternative. It's a bit different. Hey, if it works for you, why not do it? So I don't go every week, but every 2 or 3 weeks I'll go and I just get that immersive hour on my own, in my own head, in my own body. And, I'm not really that alternative. I'm pretty straightforward, but I love it, and it's hugely popular now.
Yes.
And I actually, to give Keith Earls his credit on this, it's something that he has focused on, and a number of other rugby players have joined me for class and said, wow, that was really good. We spent all week, building ourselves up to be physical and aggressive. Isn't it lovely just to be present? And I think it's like everything. I could never meditate. I was no good at this whole mindfulness thing when it came out. I couldn't concentrate for long enough. But this is a kind of guided way through it. I think it's hugely beneficial.
We saw it, didn't we? I think there was clips from the World Cup with the Irish team where they're actually in the changing room, and before they go back out, they're actually getting together in a huddle, and they're actually
breathing. And they do it on field too. And it's kind of a reset and a refocus moment for a group. So, I'm a firm believer that anything that can make you feel and be better is worth trying. Not everything will be for you and not everything is for everybody, but, try it once and give it a go, because otherwise, life would be very boring.
Yeah. And actually, I know we've segued a little bit, but what's interesting about it is if we think about how we operate as we move through our day in work, and then let's say you give the example of somebody like Johnny Sexton lining up to kick a conversion, and you look at what that process is. He's taking his time. He's breathing nice and deeply, refocusing. And if we were to say in our day, how many times do we actually do that?
No, mental clarity is absolutely vital to performance, whether it's sports or corporate or otherwise.
Yeah.
And we're not very good as human beings. We're always on, we're moving. It's almost a badge of honor to be busy.
Yes.
Whereas sometimes, and I struggle with it too, sometimes I'd be like, I'm not busy. This is really annoying. Instead of saying, you know what, take a deep breath, go and do something and come back, And again, that takes practice and discipline. And there's nothing worse than saying, okay, I'm gonna head off here at 3, and then you might get 5 phone calls between 4 and 5. But I'd rather be doing it in the back garden. My kids are kicking a ball around than sitting at the desk going, okay, I know I've stuff to do. I'm procrastinating over doing stuff I don't want to do. What could I do? Just get out of the office and,
And there's a high chance those phone calls between 4 and 5 are going to be far more productive if you have had an hour at home with the kids and then you're logging on to maybe have those phone calls.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we talked about this 4 years ago, that and again, I have to credit other people because I'm not a rocket scientist on this, but Conor Murray gave me a book called A Miracle Morning around about COVID time, and I read it. I thought it was really interesting, but it's kind of reset my day in the fact that I would be in bed generally at 9:30 every night, out of choice, and I look forward to it. Might watch Netflix, might just go to sleep, but I get up early and I get kind of, I wake up, I get up. And that could be at times 4:30. Now, other times it's 6:45. It depends on what's happening in my life. And I'll just get that kind of, let's call it an hour as a round number in the morning, in my own house, on my own, cup of coffee, and a read.
Yeah.
And because I won't do it in the evening. There's too much going on. My kids are getting older. They don't want to go to bed. Like my son is like, Dad, what do you mean you're going to bed at 9:15? I don't want to go to bed. I was like, well, you stay up, but I'm going to bed. I'm going down to bed, So again, those little kind of practices in your day that, have got me through nearly 60 books now since COVID. And I wouldn't have read 60 books in the rest of my life. Sometimes they're educational books. Sometimes they're, looking over there, Carol Dweck's Mindset, read that book. I like books like that, but I also like to kind of pepper it in with a bit of history, particularly around Northern Ireland, or, sports autobiographies of people that I know or admire, So again, it's just the practice of having an hour being present. And it is hard not to look at the phone first. It is hard not to download your emails from overnight or look at your WhatsApps and see what's going on. Then you might have a scroll through Instagram and see what you miss. And obviously Twitter, which I absolutely hate, but it's the best source of news that exists out there. Anything happens on Twitter happens within seconds, whereas it could take, hours for it to be in print or, mainstream online media. So,
there's
the practice, balance. And I don't mind looking at my phone. I like looking at my phone. I can be honest, it's addictive. We all know that. We know the dopamine hit we get. We know the FOMO we get by not looking at it. But again, just being able to bring in things like reading into my life. And COVID for me, it was, we were all looking for things to do, which is probably how we connected. It's like, okay, well, let's create some content. Let's do something. But it was a bit of a reset, and in some ways it's a shame that a lot of the values and principles that people had in COVID have now kind of dissipated back into societal life of, work and home and pints and social, and, I don't think many people give themselves just enough time to them.
No, and I asked you that question 4 years ago. Do you think as we find our new normal, do you think a lot of these behaviors that we've been able to build during COVID would slip away? And I think you did, in some way, you said some individuals will obviously naturally be able to stay consistent with these behaviors, but unfortunately, most of us will slip back. And I think that's been the case.
Mindset, you know. I mean, you know, it's no different. Like if you win a Champions Cup in 2018, how do you maintain the standards for 19 through to 24? And, you know, it's the same, you know, if you get up at 5 o'clock, how do you maintain that? You know, is it good for you? Does it add value? And are you disciplined enough to continue to do it? Yeah. And like, I don't beat myself up if I wake up at 6:45. You know, I'm like, oh, that's all right. I must have had a good sleep, you know. But I think that's just human nature. You know, it's hard to be disciplined, you know. And again, what you learn from team sports, you know, if I remember listening to people in the past, you know, if you're out for dinner on a Thursday night and you match on Saturday and the waiter comes around and says, do you want dessert? It isn't, of course, the answer is, of course I do. But they think about it and say, well, how does this impact on me? And then how does that have a knock-on effect? And it takes great discipline. And that's why I think, you know, business owners in particular can learn so much from high-performance sport. You don't have to implement it. Not everything is implementable from sport to business. But there's certainly a lot of underarching principles of discipline and resilience and communication and teamwork and purpose, I think, that really come, you know, to the fore and are evident in successful businesses and business people.
Yeah. And actually, I'd like to bring you back just for a moment, because you touched on something. You talked about days when you've got low motivation, right? And the reason why I think this is a good question to ask is because I definitely think there's a misconception when we look at business owners, athletes, etc. Now, we're getting a lot better, right? But it's this idea that those people are just built differently. You know, they don't have the ebb and flow in terms of mood. And I think it's quite nice to call out, no, we all actually have those days where we feel like maybe I don't want to get out of bed today. My question to you would be, what's your approach when you are having days like that?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, you just get on with it because you have to.
Yeah.
But then, you know, like we discussed earlier, like if I'm having a flat Monday afternoon and I don't have meetings in the diary and I'm, you know, not I'll just try and get away from work somehow. You know, whether it's go to the gym and hit the bag or whether it's, you know, get out on the bike or something just for an hour or two. You know, the natural chemical releases of exercise are great, you know, pick me up. You know, I'm not a big advocate of the Friday night, I need a few pints, it's been a long week. You know, because I know, like, call it old fashioned or call it, you know, old. Like, I don't like the effect it has on me on the Saturday morning. Yes, sure, I'd love to go and have 5 pints this evening at 5 o'clock, but I know it'll ruin my day tomorrow. Yeah. And I'd rather wake up tomorrow and go, God, I feel great. What have I got to do today? What can I do today? You know, so the ebbs and flows, you know, maybe it's different being a business owner or working for yourself, shall we say, than working in a team. But I think that part, like if we parallel it back to sports team, you know, you can't have a low day, or you can have a low day on a personal level, but it doesn't mean that you can't continue to contribute to the team at the best of your ability. And I think in the corporate world, you know, it must be similar. You know, I mean, I'm not sure that Elma or Luke come in every day going, I'm really just so happy to be here. I'm sure there are days, but kind of the team picks you up too. But it's also your commitment to them. If I'm having a low day, like I'll tell the guys, I'm in really shit form today, right? So, you know, I'll pick up out of it. It's nothing major, but if I'm a bit narky and snarky, I just want to tell you in advance. And they just kind of laugh and go, yeah, whatever. I give it an hour or two. You're probably a couple of coffees into you and you're kind of, okay, grand, you know.
Rather than them wondering.
Yeah, I mean, there are circumstances in all of our lives in the working world where something doesn't go the way you'd hoped it. Or there's a crisis or there's something going on in the background that does eat away with you. And I do have nights where I wake up and I'm worried about stuff, of course. You know, I think that's natural. The question is, how quickly can you address it, help fix it and move on from it? And if you can't fix it, and then you have to just focus on moving on from it. You know, weigh up the impact, the pros and cons in most cases, and sort of say, okay, well, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? You know, and I'll say to Luke and Elma, like, you know, there's no such thing as failure. Like, try it. If it doesn't work, it's okay. I'm not going to sit there and say you lost that deal because. I'll be much happier if you lose the deal and you told me why you lost the deal, and you understand it wasn't happening again. I think that's the right attitude to have. Okay, you can be disappointed if something doesn't happen the way you'd hoped it happened, but what did you learn from it? Was it your fault or was it outside of your control? I mean, that's just more valuable. Is
that something you've learned in your time as a business owner?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we all have failures. Daily, weekly, monthly, just depends when. There are great runs where everything's going absolutely swimmingly well. You think, God, we're invincible here. And there are other days where like 2 or 3 things might not go the way you'd hope they go. And it is a bit of a kick in the teeth. And it is, you just got to learn to deal with it. But I think, that's where experience comes into play. If I sat there and beat myself up over everything that didn't happen, I wouldn't be working for myself. Like I wouldn't be able for it. I'd be better off being an employee and saying, "Oh, look, it didn't happen. I'm really sorry, but that's the company's problem."
Yes.
So, I don't think everybody's wired that way. I don't think there are many people who can work for themselves. I think people find it very difficult sometimes to be alone. I like my own company. I keep saying this at home. My wife's like, you can't stand not being connected to people and this. I said, but I actually genuinely do enjoy my own company too. So,
introverted, extrovert.
I don't know what it is, but like it just depends on the time, the day, the circumstance. I'm perfectly happy to sit for an hour and a half in the morning on my own and be perfectly at peace. And equally so, I absolutely love when people drop in for a coffee and I'm not expecting them and you're kind of like, okay, park all that and catch up. So
I like this idea, just based on what you've said there, quote, I can't remember who actually said it, but it's this idea of, if we can build the ability to be able to sit in a room alone with ourselves, we can solve most of our problems. But I think in today's society, because we are so connected, we actually find it quite difficult to sit alone with our own thoughts.
And it's only getting worse. And I fear greatly for the generations coming behind us that are always on, always connected. I mean, at my stage of life, I had a lot of my life where I was not connected. And I find it hard now not to be connected. So when you look at, say, teenagers now with phones and they're walking to school and everybody's head's in a phone, everybody on the bus head's in a phone, even people sitting in traffic, their heads are in a phone. I do, worry about what impact that is going to have longer term. I mean, something I read a long time ago was somebody said that like social media is going to be a worse disease in the future than smoking is now.
Yeah.
And again, I don't read into it. I'm not that interested to know the impact because I'm connected, but I'm conscious of it.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly conscious of it. I'm not very good at it, of trying not to be connected when I'm at home. But as I keep saying to my kids, like I run my business through my phone, my emails, my WhatsApps, my phone, everything is done through this device. Yeah. So it's no wonder that they're curious and want to pick it up and they want to, can I go on your phone? Can I go on Spotify? Can I watch this on YouTube? And particularly my older guy, like Dad, he went to bed last night before Liverpool were beaten 3-0 by Atalanta. And he's like, Dad, can we look at the goals on your phone? I was like, no, like, I know you want to see it and I know you love football, but I'm not showing you my phone at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Because even he at that age is starting to become connected or wanting to be connected. So I don't know what the next generation have ahead.
We had an interesting guest. Our previous guest is a cognitive psychologist and basically looks at Gen Z and moving into the workforce and ultimately how they differ in a way from other generations. And obviously a big kind of, I suppose, crux of that is the social media that they were born with. And ultimately, as they've moved from kind of adolescence into adulthood, they're the first generation really who are dealing with a lot of the problems connected to social media.
Yeah, I'm quite sure. I mean, as I said earlier, Twitter is evil. It's a cesspit.
Yeah.
But it is news and it's the fastest news. So it has a function in my working life. Instagram I love, and it's probably the only way we can promote our business as to what we're doing. And so many people say, oh, I saw you're doing this and things look great and business looks great. I mean, look under the hood here, it maybe isn't as good as it looks, but it's a great channel for promoting, equally so LinkedIn for connecting, and championing the work you're doing, as opposed to saying, okay, we got to hire a PR company and we got to do a media day and we got to tell people what we're doing. So like there are pros and cons to it. I came off Facebook probably around about the start of COVID time. And, my only regret is I'm connected to a lot of people there that I like to see what's going on in their lives. However, it's one less distraction in my life that I don't need. I think we were on holidays somewhere and I cleared everything off my phone. So I don't need that. It's a distraction. It's not adding value, and again, it was one of those, we call it, my wife and I, Geraldine, would say holiday resolutions. We always come home with holiday resolutions. And it's probably because you kind of somewhat reset, you're somewhat relaxed and you're somewhat clearer in thinking, saying, okay, well, what do we want to do? What's our holiday resolution from this? So,
I like that. You've got that time to think.
Well, you do, yeah. I mean, and obviously notwithstanding 3 kids running around the place, but like it's probably, again, it's back to the point of like taking time away from life, We probably don't give ourselves enough time.
I think that's a big one that I hope people do take. And listen, maybe it's just highlighting it for people, that the lack of time we have, the space we have to really do some proper thinking around the life I'm living right now. I think we're so busy, we're so connected that we lack that.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I'd love to ask you, Dave, and I think you made at the start of our conversation, you talked about the fact that a lot of our Olympic athletes are in a really, I suppose, a position where they're heading in as maybe the favorites. They're not the underdogs. A lot of them are gold medalists. And I'd love to make a parallel in business here, because rather than asking you, how do you bounce back from a failure, right? Actually, when you are successful in business and you're moving in, and the reason I want to ask you this is, I think a lot of people, they experience success and sometimes they feel a little bit like the imposter. They feel like the fraud. So mentally, even though they've got everything under control, or so it seems, the success can bring that level of self-doubt for the individual. So rather than asking you, how do you deal with your failures? When you are successful in your business, and what have you seen with the athletes that you work with that are successful, mentally, that enables them to continue to pursue, I suppose, even higher levels of success or consistent success?
It's a difficult question to answer entirely. I think mindset. I think everything comes back to mindset and continuous improvement, and ultimately process. To be elite at anything, you have to have a process. And certainly that's the foundations of everything. Any athlete that's achieved world-class success in Olympic sports, they've done the 10,000 hours. It's about applying a process and discipline and having a mindset of, wanting to continuously improve. And the interesting thing about this Olympic cycle coming around, everybody's getting very excited because we could win medals in athletics, in swimming, in gymnastics, in rowing, and in boxing. That's a product of 20 years of the Olympic Federation, Sport Ireland, the Institute, and various other bodies in the Paralympics in investing and developing in sport. We should be getting better every Olympic cycle. We should have more chances of medals every Olympic cycle. So it's not a flash in a pan. It's the result of continuous investment and support for high performance sport. So, will we win? It's very hard to say where we'll win medals, if we'll win medals, but we're certainly in the best shape we've ever been going into an Olympic cycle because of the people and the structures and the processes. So, how do you deal with that? As I said, process is really important. And that, whether it's Rhys McClellan in a gymnastics routine, he has a process and it's practice. Whether it's Paul and Fintan in the boat, Paul and Gary very kind of plainly put after they won a silver medal, should we just get in the boat, we start there, we finish there, and we do it as quick as we can. That's the sport, but the process, the day in, the day out, the discipline, the improvement, the little 1%ers that are always referred to, no different in boxing. It's 18 square feet, there's 2 people, there's 6 punches and a referee. You can't do the same you did the last Olympics or the same you did the last tournament. It's tactical, it's strategic. Obviously you can have your conditioning at a level. You can have your skill set at a level, but you have to be able to adapt to what's in front of you, and that comes through those countless hours of practice, discipline, practice again, and mindset. And I think mentally, high performance sport is we all know it's 99% mental. Would you say the same for business now? Yeah, I would. Yeah, more so. I mean, there's no physical requirement for me to do anything than sit at a desk. So, so what do you train in an office? You train your brain, but as I said earlier, I like to make sure I'm getting 300 to 500 minutes of exercise a week. Like, that's for me. That's not for business. Yes. Okay, I feel better when I come in there. But it's about learning and continually wanting to get better. I mean, that's what it comes down to. In COVID again, doing a diploma in corporate governance and executive leadership and stuff like that. That was the first time I dipped my toe back into education since I struggled through school and college back in the late 80s and early 90s, and I actually enjoyed it again. I was like, okay, I enjoy learning. I need to do more about learning. It's a bit like the reading thing. It's like, what can you learn? What can you apply?
Yes.
Listening. I'm not a great podcast listener. I don't find that I ever have time to immerse myself in something. I listen to snippets and bits, but you learn from peer to peer as well. You learn from people you're working with. I learn a lot from my athletes. I look at, and I'm going to use Tig Furlong as a good example. So Tig I'm going to use Paul and Tig as two good examples. Paul's a qualified physio and a doctor and an Olympic gold and silver medalist and has 5 world championships, and I've lost count beyond that. Tig Furlong will complete his ACCA exams in probably 2026. I think he's got 3 left to do of the 12. He has applied a process to his accountancy exams that he also applies to his high performance life. So he's managed to balance a dual career for the last number of years. And ultimately, when he does choose to retire in 5, 6, 7, 8 years, who knows, he will have built a dual career by being disciplined and applying a process to it and immersing himself in learning. And those for me they're kind of the gold standard benchmarks cases. It goes back to Rob, almost 20 years ago. He did his degree, he did his master's, he invested in business, he became a director. Even looking further back, Felipe Contepomi, he came to Leinster to be a doctor, not to play rugby. He just happened to be good at rugby and be able to manage both. So
Yes.
I don't know if that really answers the question, but it again, process, and it's process, it's learning, it's not doing the same thing over and over again. If we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we're going to get the same results. And you can't, if you stay still, you're dead, in any industry, but in particularly in a people management business, is how do you add value over and above, and how do you, expand the service that you can provide, the advice. I mean, ultimately we're measured on the revenue we generate, of course, personally, professionally, and by our clients, but it's all that value added advisory stuff that I think is kind of the point of difference.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there in terms of the question is, don't overcomplicate things. Obviously, your success will leave clues, so reflect on that success and then reiterate your process. It's ever evolving, your process.
Ever evolving, continuous learning. That's absolutely, I think there's a word for it. Kaizen, is it?
Yes.
It the German word Kaizen? Is that self-improvement? Gary Keegan taught me about that in his time in the Institute of Sport, and I just thought it just stuck in my mind, continuous improvement.
Brilliant.
Because if you just sit still, someone's going to pass you out.
Yes.
I'm not ready to be passed out yet. But there will be a point in time. I'd certainly like to finish my working career at the top of my game and be able to step away by choice rather than be forced because somebody else has come along and done differently and I didn't see what that was.
I think that's a good sentiment for us all to kind of take on board as well.
Yeah, trust me, I plan to work for at least another 15 plus years. So I have certainly no desire to stop. I would be bored very quickly.
Final question. Sure. And I really appreciate your time today. So final question, and it's how we end the podcast now. We look for maybe one lesson learned throughout your life as a business owner. So it can be as quick as one line. So something that you would like to leave our listeners with.
God, you're putting me on the spot. You could tell me this at the start. No, I think you put person first. Put the person first. Look at the person you're talking to. Understand the person and put them first. Everything else is outside of your control.
Dave McHugh, Line Up Sports, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.